So welcome to today. Thank you for making it. And as you know, it's an introduction to the Enneagram. So it's really intended for people who are quite new to the Enneagram, who've just heard of it and are wondering why the people who love it so very much and can't stop talking about it. So I want to just create this introduction. It's also for people who coach and use the Enneagram in leadership development to help them introduce it to their clients. Sometimes I've heard people say that it's quite difficult for them to describe what it is, and that's pretty unsurprising. So today there'll be some options put on the table for how you can describe it, and some of them will land, but that needs to be quite contextually specific because the Enneagram is different things in different contexts. So I'm going to take you through some slides and also give you an opportunity to jump in and express your perspectives. So the first thing is some of the different ways that people think about this Enneagram. So Helen Palmer was one of the earlier teachers of the Enneagram, and her perspective on it is that she calls it their sophisticated system that helps us to know ourselves and to know others as they know themselves, and that it gives us a customized roadmap, which I think is a really cool way of describing it for our ongoing personal development. So if you look at the things in the middle that I've highlighted in red, take a moment to have a read through those.
So, are you going to be able to send us these slides, or must we take notes of them?
I'm not going to, but I'm going to share the recording.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Okay. Yeah, I think I must start again because there's so much background noise. Okay, I'm going to start again. Just because this is an introductory public video. Okay, so this talk is about why do the people who love the Enneagram love it so much? What's it about, how to work with it, and how it can be used in different contexts. So first of all, to give you a sense of what one of original teachers of the Enneagram said about it, Helen Palmer on the left, is that it's a system that can help us to know ourselves, but also to help us to know other people almost from the inside as they are to themselves. So to really understand their worldview, their way of thinking, their motivations and preoccupations. So it's incredibly helpful. And you'll see that that's one of the ways in which it gives us a deep compassion for people. It also offers us what she calls a customized roadmap for our own development. So how do we step beyond our limitations? How do we access our highest potential? So some of those are the ways in which it's a roadmap for us. And then if you look at the things that are highlighted in red in the middle of this slide, these are some of the things that I've seen and read and heard people say, and reactions I've had from people when I introduce the Enneagram or mention it, or people are talking about it and you overhear them and you realize how it's perceived by people who haven't worked with it. So it's sometimes seen as a religious cult type of thing. There are people that find it scary and esoteric and think it's quite an occult system, and they stay away from it for those reasons. I think that's got something to do with the symbol. Some people think of it as shopping cart spirituality. So it's quite eclectic. You can take what you want and leave what you want. And, it's also something that you have to invest money in, to go on workshops and to get coaching and to study the system. And other people think of it as a psychometric test. So some of them think it's a good one. Some of them think it's a fad. And some of it will compare it to things like the MBTI and DISC that are used in organizations to help people think about their problem-solving styles, their personality differences. But it also gets critiqued a lot by people who think of it in one of those ways because it hasn't been normed and validated as a system. It's not an empirically validated system. And it's important to know that and not to position it in that way. It's not accurate, and it shouldn't be used for many of the things that psychometrics are used for, such as making hiring decisions, promoting people, etc. So there's some ethical considerations there. And it's also not registered with things like health professions boards and councils in different countries. I know in South Africa it definitely isn't. I'm not sure about many other countries. And other people think it's a big technical system full of jargon and it's overwhelming and complex. Other people really think of it as a way of boxing and labeling people and are very put off by that. They hear people saying, she's a 9, he's a 7, and they find it very alienating and they don't like to be objectified in that way. So you can really understand people's reaction to that. And then there are people who understand it as a powerful system for really understanding ourselves and supporting us on a lifelong journey of growth. But I think these red points are really worth taking notice of. And people think that way for very good reasons. And it's how we as practitioners and coaches use and teach and speak about the Enneagram and live it in a particular way that leads people to think that way. So if you stop for a minute and consider the questions on the bottom right-hand side of this slide. What did you think about it when you first encountered it? Why? And then what brought you here today? So I'd like to open the floor so that we can have a little bit of conversation about that. So when you first encountered the Enneagram, what were your initial impressions? So if you'd like to raise your hands, I'd love to get some feedback on that. Yeah, Catherine. Unmute, yeah?
Okay, so when I was first introduced to the Enneagram, it was about a girl, it was a friend of mine who told me that this was going to change my life. And she kept saying the Enneagram, and I kept, the what, the what, the what. Then when I did go and look at the Enneagram and I saw the symbol, yeah, my first thing was, yeah. But because of her influence and knowing this girl like I do, I thought, okay, now I have to. And then, yeah, then just changed. Also the Greek, the name and the affiliation and everything. But yeah, my first thing was excitement to learn about this thing. And then when I did see the symbol, yeah, it was like, but then I suppose that's also from my traditional religious thing that I, was drilled into me. Yeah. So that.
So would that resonate with that thing of this is some weirdo esoteric thing and it's got a little bit of a occult vibe about it?
Yeah, it's a little bit, yeah, culty, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so that happened to you. And let's hear from you, Gillian. Thanks, Kat.
Hi, Ingrid. How are you going? And sorry I was late. I was in a client meeting. I heard about the Enneagram from a client, actually. We did their workshop. They're happy. They were really thrilled. And I have done DISC and Myers-Briggs. I'm certified in both. And as a consultant, I'm always intrigued to just learn more and understanding that there's more research being done, and we haven't figured it all out already, to see what else is out there. And some of them, or quite a few of them overlap. And particularly if you have a client who is working with a particular tool, and you might be working with that client after, it's like, okay, well, let me see what's in this so that I can learn more and be able to provide more for my clients. So I did see the symbol, but I was like, yeah, that's only because they need 9 points. They need 9 points, and they found this and it looked cool, you know. But the fact that the point didn't come like to the middle in the end, I was like, yeah, that's not the cult symbol. The cult symbol is slightly different. and so that didn't bother me at all. And I always sort of delve into research. So when my client said they were doing that, I went and I started researching about it, and what I found didn't worry me. It just intrigued me more. And then I had a conversation with you, Ingrid. I was like, oh, this sounds cool. Let me find out more about it to see if I can put something else into my toolkit so that I can help my clients get where they want to get to.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So you also had that moment of skepticism around what is this thing, you know, but you dispelled that pretty quickly with your curiosity. And I suppose in the client context, they weren't trying to introduce you to a cult.
No, I didn't think they would.
Yeah.
In Trinidad, they're very, you know, non-cultish, let's put it that way. So I didn't at all think that, you know, they were trying to get me to drink the juice. No.
Yeah. And what were the clients saying about it?
Well, it was quite interesting because we did, there was some talk about, well, you know, I'm a 3 and, you know, he's a 7 and that sort of stuff in the session, but it wasn't done in a negative way. And one of the activities that we did at the beginning of the day, it was a very simple activity just to get people up. We were saying, okay, who's a coffee person and who's a tea person? And we put them along a continuum and everybody was spreading out. And then we asked different questions. We asked harder questions, you know, who's here as an explorer and who's here as a prisoner? And so, you know, they really got to kind of say, well, I really don't want to be here, but and you know, who said they were, and they ended up, throughout the 2 days, they ended up calling that the cheap Enneagram. They said, well, on the first day, we did the cheap Enneagram because it felt as if, in a nutshell, that kind of gave them a view of, you know, who, you know, was in what position. And I just laughed at them. But said, I had to tell you, they kept calling our first exercise, our icebreaker, they kept calling that the cheap Enneagram.
Great, that's wonderful. Thank you for telling me. Very interesting. So they could see that this thing is multidimensional.
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And let's hear from you, Leah. I know I was the one who introduced you to it, but what were your first impressions? Not of me, but of the system.
I was rather neutral, I think. I'm interested in astrology since a while. I really like it, but I don't think that it's very action-oriented. And I think you can go to the system and see whatever you want to see, but I still appreciate it very much. And I had taken the MBTI test, and that was somewhat interesting, but not overwhelmingly life-changing or anything. So I didn't have big expectations for the Enneagram. And just reading the online reports about my type was not so impressive to me. And I thought it was like a caricature of, this, like I'm an 8 and this hard boss yelling around at people. I was like, I don't really connect to that. But then it was really you and your approach and your courses going deeper. And I think what really hooked me was the Into the Wounded Heart workshop that you held for my type. And to really go very deep, understand motivations, and then understanding those motivations, I could see how I can really use this practically. So for me, it's the most useful tool that I have discovered yet in the personality space. I don't know if we can even call it or locate it there.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you, Ingrid.
Oh, thank you for that. So we get a little sample of how people encounter the system, some of the initial thoughts, kind of seeing it as maybe a bit occult, seeing it in the camp of personality assessments, and taking it as that, and then discovering, wait a minute, this is not one of those, this is something else. So it's interesting to hear some of these perspectives. So Khomotsa, Alistair, I'm going to bring you in maybe a later round of questions. I'm going to go back to some of these slides and carry on with some of the intro material. So where does this thing come from, and what is its original purpose? So when you look at this, you realize quite quickly that it is not a personality test in the conventional sense at all. The people that brought the Enneagram into our awareness are really the founding grandfathers here, Gurdjieff, Oscar Ichazo, and Claudio Naranjo. So Gurdjieff was an Armenian mystic, early 20th century, and he really was a mystic. And one of his famous quotes is, life is really only real when I am. And what he means by I am is when we are self-realized, when we realize the nature of what we are. He also, the quote below, you're in a prison. If you wish to get out of it, you first got to realize that you are in a prison. So what he's talking about is our imprisonment in our own psyches, in our own assumptions, in the veils of our awareness of what the true nature of our consciousness is. And he spoke quite a lot about our mechanical ego, which means all the patterns and the habits that we do as a matter of routine, our ways of seeing the world that we don't question at all, they're really conditioned. So he spoke about this metaphor of asleep and awake, in prison versus free. So our true consciousness is very different from the kind of mechanical and automatic ego behavior that we exercise every single day. So he is trying to get people to awaken. Then his work was adopted by Oscar Ichazo, and Oscar Ichazo refined all the elements of personality around the 9 points. So Gurdjieff didn't do that. Gurdjieff described the points in what's called the process Enneagram as a key to awakening. But then Oscar Ichazo identified each point as being a descriptor of a certain personality style and a core fixation. So that's what he identified, is what is the core motivation, the core suffering that we're trying to compensate for with these automatic patterns that dull our awareness. And then the last one on the right, Claudio Naranjo, was a psychiatrist. And what he did after staying with Ichazo quite briefly is he applied all his psychiatric knowledge and his knowledge of psychological theory, Gestalt, object relations. So he brought many dimensions to the teaching of the Enneagram, but he was primarily known for the more, I'd say, psychiatric and diagnostic elements. So he wrote a very important book called Character and Neurosis, but it really focuses on the dark side of each of the personality types and the pathological levels of health of those types. So his work is very hard-hitting and quite painful to read, actually. So there's some teachers that show more of a dark mirror on the personality. And when we read their work, we get a kind of shock and feel quite exposed and embarrassed about our personalities and the kinds of manipulative strategies that we use in the world. Gurdjieff liked to ask a question, what kind of idiot are you? And that was before Enneagram types were invented. But he was inviting people to look at their habitual behavior that is both manipulative and self-deceptive. So their ways of escaping feeling inadequate or insecure or vulnerable. So he would joke about people and point out their core feature, what he called. He'd say, "Oh, you're a squirming idiot." And no, he would make up these names. So he had quite a tricksterish way of teaching and exposing people that kind of cut to the core. And then I put in this Gary Larson cartoon because it sums it up pretty well. Yes, they're all fools, gentlemen, but the question remains, what kind of fools are they? So the Enneagram really helps us to understand how our image and persona and the way that we deploy that persona and the way in which we deceive ourselves is a real certain brand of foolishness. So we can laugh at ourselves using the Enneagram. We can laugh at the silly things that we do and our habits. But underneath that, there's a very, very serious element to it, which is about what are we really when we get behind our pretense and our persona, our masks. And how do we get in touch with what we really are behind those masks? So I mentioned the mechanical ego. Some teachers talk about autopilot. So we're on autopilot half our lives. We're just going along. We don't really realize that we're alive. We don't think about what we really are. And often it's only when we have a shock. Might be when we lose somebody or we go through a major life transition of some kind, that we get thrown into a place where we start to think about ourselves and our lives with a deeper self-reckoning. And we're very aware of our mortality, and we become aware of our falsehood and our self-deception. And that's the moment where we are invited to get closer to who we really are. We realize that we've been lying to ourselves, that we've amputated parts of ourselves within relationships or within our careers. We're out of touch with our true sense of flow and purpose, and we've been living like a zombie. So the Enneagram helps us to realize the way in which we've been living like a zombie. And in some ways, those 9 points describe 9 different styles of falling asleep and forgetting our true consciousness, forgetting our authentic nature, our state of awareness. And it invites us to recover our true self. And I don't mean that in terms of personality or attributes. I mean in terms of a state of being, an experience of ourselves in our lives, within our being, within our way of thinking, within our hearts, and within our presence within our own bodies. So that, I think, really is the essence of what it's for. So hopefully you can already see that this is not a conventional personality test by any means. It really is something far deeper that gets to the deep questions of what we really are. So it's not just who we really are, it's what we really are at a substance level, in our ontological state. What is the nature of our being? Then you see that different teachers really emphasize different aspects of the Enneagram. They teach it differently. And one of my teachers, Tom Condon, here, speaks about how every teacher can't help but teach their own way of thinking and their own lens on the world. We've all got different lenses, and I'll speak to that in a minute. But because our personalities are very ingrained and we've got built-in conditioned defense mechanisms, ways of seeing, paradigms that we've been exposed to, systems that we've been taught, we can't help coming from where we are and who we are in our way of approaching the Enneagram and in our way of teaching it. So, and once you've seen that, you can't unsee it. So some teachers are incredibly mystical. Helen Palmer is an intuitive and a psychic, so she brings that particular lens. Tom Condon has got an NLP and Ericksonian hypnotherapy background, so he doesn't look at the spiritual dimensions. Russ Hudson, one of the most famous teachers, has got a very multifaceted way of teaching it. Almas is one of the true mystics of the Enneagram. And each teacher has a different emphasis. Mario Sikora really uses it in organizations and with leaders, and he's got a very pragmatic way of talking about it. So everyone brings their orientation, their focus areas, their preoccupations, and then their style. So we often, as Enneagram coaches and teachers, unwittingly teach other people our defense mechanisms and our preoccupations. So it's always important as you learn the Enneagram and start using it to become self-aware of which angle you're pushing. And it usually comes quite a bit later that you can really start seeing that. But it's helpful to know it up front, and especially if you're going to choose which teachers to follow. Because at first you won't know who's who and what their orientations are. But if you expose yourself to a broad range of teachers, you'll start getting a sense of what approach talks to you, whether you like the more spiritual and esoteric side, or whether you like the really pragmatic business side. But there's something for everything in the system, and you can take it into any area of your life. So one of the features of my particular personality style is that I want it all, and I want to learn everything, and I want to be exposed to all of them and synthesize them as best as possible and get the common themes that I find in each of them. So that, I would say, is a feature of how I teach it. I don't come up with my own theories and ideas, but I integrate many, many things that I find and try and be truthful to the teachers and the sources of where I found them. And if I am really truthful about my orientation to the Enneagram, and this is not the way I would position it in a highly pragmatic, like a leadership and business context, is quite a spiritual orientation to the Enneagram. And this really comes from my exposure to Sufism. I'm doing a PhD in comparative religion, and I'm comparing aspects of Sufism, Christianity, and Buddhism. And my understanding of what the Enneagram really is helping us to understand how our deeply essential spiritual nature, when we become human and forget that dimension of our being, we enter humanity, we get wounded inevitably because our very vulnerable child consciousness cannot really cope with what we encounter. And so we develop conditioned, adaptive, and defensive systems to deploy in the world, which is why I chose that image of a holographic representation. So the wounded child in ourselves has to have a coping strategy, and the coping strategy that the child adopts is an idea of the self. So this is what I need to be to get by in this world. I better toughen up, or I better be sweet, I better be helpful. How am I going to make people like me? How am I going to find safety? So that wounded child figures out a strategy. And the strategy is the holographic representation of a self. So it's not real. It's kind of two-dimensional. It's insubstantial if you amplify that metaphor. And it's kind of one size fits all. It's not really alive. And it's a stand-in for the true self. So what the Enneagram tries to help us see is that we are doing this. And it helps us to see what is the holographic image that we're projecting into the world. And what we try and do is we try and get people to see us in that way. We try and get them to see us as successful, kind, or dutiful, or easygoing, whatever it is. So we project this image that is not really all of what we are as a defensive strategy. Behind that, we're actually suffering. We're feeling our inadequacies, our sense of helplessness, our anxiety. So all of the core feelings get covered over and masked by this adaptive strategy in our defensive system that we deploy. And the Enneagram helps us to see, oh, this is what I'm doing. This is why I'm doing it. This is the underlying pain. And it helps us to get behind that and get to a much deeper sense of our presence when we aren't acting out of that conditioning. And I chose this image because it's without personality attributes. It's more like consciousness without an identity, without opinions. And, you know, if I were to use New Agey language, I would almost just describe it as an energetic presence. But it really is the mystery of who we are, the true deep mystery. And sometimes I jokingly describe the Enneagram as an interdimensional portal. Now, I like to be a bit playful about this stuff because I know it does sound weird, but what it does do is allow us to begin to experience what we are behind all this conditioning. And one writer, Kabir Helminski, I really like his writing. He's a Sufi teacher, and he talks about our celestial prototype. So it's almost like finding the original blueprint of who we really, really are, our deep spiritual blueprint. And finding that out allows us to understand something about the nature of consciousness itself. And then on the right, I put another one of my personal ways of defining the Enneagram. So it's it's quite long, but it's a map in a mirror to help us understand what veils our awareness, what distorts our desire, and what distracts us from the path to truly understanding our being. So these personality patterns are very compulsive and they're very reactive. So when we're insecure, that's what comes out. And that anxiety and those preoccupations make us really forget who we really are. And there are veils and distortions of our thinking, from a more spiritual perspective. And when we begin to truly experience our own depth of presence and the nature of our being and the flow of who we are, then we start to understand our place in existence. And this is what the Enneagram offers. So it's a deep centeredness, what Russ Hudson and Jessica did in their one course called experiential depth. So it's a space in which we aren't easily triggered. We're grounded in something very deep and very present. And it's a place of deep ease of being, a quiet mind, and a sense of faith in oneself and confidence in one's ability to act in the world. So the more you work with the Enneagram and become aware of these personas that you're projecting, and the more you build up your inner stability behind those projections, the more they start to dissolve and you start experiencing a deeper ease of being. So that's what the system offers us. And when I talk about the patterns that it describes, so these are some of the things that you'll find in the Enneagram. So these labels here are not very familiar to people. I've thrown you really in the deep end here. So these are the Enneagram anti-self actions of each of the types. So it's the way in which we repress our true self to avoid being hurt. It's the way in which we dissociate. It's the way in which we cut off parts of our psyche. It's the way in which we don't allow ourselves to feel our true feelings, the way we hide from the world. So you can see the Enneagram describes these things in immense refinement, and we start being able to notice when we're doing it, and we start to develop a deep compassion for ourselves around these patterns. We realize, oh, I'm self-punishing. And we start being able to relate to our inner critic, for example, in a very different way. And we start to be able to pay attention to our true feelings with more self-compassion and more understanding and less self-judgment. So it's one of the ways in which the Enneagram is really liberating. It brings us into a much healthier relationship with whatever is arising in our psyche. And here's a lot of text, but what this describes is where our type arises. If you look at the central picture, and I've used the map analogy, that we've got an old distorted map of reality. It's outdated. It's a historical map that comes from our childhood experiences. And it comes from our genetics and our epigenetics. And in our early childhood experience, we have everyday wounding or adverse childhood experiences that give us a certain perspective on the world, on our place in the world, on others, and our relationships and love and connection. And those experiences lead us to formulate a certain picture of ourselves in relation to reality. And that then becomes our map. And in relation to those unconscious assumptions and perspectives, we then have to develop a strategy, a survival strategy, and a way of navigating the world. So unconsciously, we start developing these patterns. And how they play out in later life, because they're quite fixed, is they play out in stuck relationship patterns, our leadership style, our career derailers and blind spots, any of our fixed behavioral patterns where we think, why did I do that again? I don't want to do that. Why do I keep procrastinating? Or why do I keep sabotaging relationships in that particular way? Why am I so preoccupied and so anxious and always, thinking of the worst case scenario? My parenting style, why am I so controlling and such a disciplinarian? So we run into walls. These patterns are limiting and they're very partial, and other people don't react to them very well because they are very subjective, and other people are coming from a very different place. So what we get to do in working with the Enneagram is see our ancient map, our early childhood map with all its strange distortions and inaccuracies, and we get to update our map. We get to see, okay, well, that was really a distortion. That was really a projection. That was based on my fears. And then being able to update our way of seeing the world. And that enables us to make much healthier decisions. Then another way that it's described by one of the teachers is that, and this is from a more spiritual perspective again, it's 9 ways we lie to ourselves about who we think we are. 9 ways we can come clean with ourselves about those illusions. And then he speaks about 9 ways we can find our way back to God. So whether you think of God, well, whichever way you think of the divine or God, or if you're a complete atheist, it doesn't really matter. What it helps you to do is become more honest with yourself and to develop more self-efficacy, more flexibility, and to become aware of and overcome some of your life habits that have gotten you into trouble, usually time and again, as I said in the title. So I love this metaphor of the map, and I use it very often. And just to amplify it a bit, so we all have different maps of the world. And even if we choose exactly the same address on Google Maps, we are going to get different perspectives on that. So we could have a street level view. We could see a weather pattern if we chose a different map, the terrain, the transport, and the restaurants. We could have a map that shows us socio-demographic issues mapped out. So depending on our preoccupations, our interests, and our filters, we're going to be seeing the same situation in very different ways. So you can imagine how helpful this is when you're in a corporate or a team environment where people are very fixated on their own assumptions and what they think is right and their problem-solving approach. And they struggle to hear other people's views, and they don't realize how much value there is in the diversity in the team. There are also some people who are not going to speak up and some people who are going to dominate the conversation. So if the one who sees the weather patterns is the one that dominates the conversation, it's going to have implications for the kinds of decisions that get made. And if the one who sees the social patterns and the inequality and the human aspect of things doesn't speak up, then that whole perspective goes missing. So it's a very, very powerful system for helping us to appreciate the person sitting opposite us in the boardroom, and to be able to think, how are they seeing the world? What questions are they asking about this problem and this challenge that we're facing? And to make sure that we elicit their perspective and their views so that we can come to a fuller picture and the best possible decision in that context. So I'm going to stop for a second here and just take any questions that are arising for you. And then I'm going to go on to some of the other aspects of what the system describes and how it can be used in different contexts. So I'm going to stop sharing and see if you've got questions, anything that you want to clarify based on what's been said so far. Anything here? Anything that stood out for you? Alistair, is there anything here that was new for you or raised any interesting thoughts for you?
Yes, a couple of things. I think the guy you mentioned, Sikaro or something.
Mm-hmm.
You said Sikora, sorry about that. You mentioned that he's got a business angle to this thing. So I think for me, that'll be a follow-up point that I will look into. I mean, as you know, I came from the finance world, and, you know, in my experience, people don't really, you know, believe in this stuff. So it's kind of a hard sell.
Yeah.
So I guess if I can sort of glean from his knowledge in terms of how to make it accessible to business leaders, that would be useful for me.
Yeah.
And for my clients as well. And then I like this map analogy you gave. I mean, considering that the way I understand the Enneagram is like it's layers of onions, you know, those layers on an onion. So I think in terms of application, it depends on how deep you want to go with that person and how far do you want to go with that person in your coaching.
Yes.
So it helps a lot. And I think that's where the controversy sometimes comes out in the community, or not just in the community, or people who experience the Enneagram from people. Someone might have an angle that doesn't resonate with you because maybe you're not into business or you're not into mysticism or that kind of thing. So that map thing really, really stuck with me. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's really helpful. And my next slide is about Mario Sikora's work. But I think the point that you're making is really important, that it's not for us to try and convert the person to a particular way of seeing the world, or to a spiritual path, or to a way of working with it, or to even liking it. No, to truly respect someone's intention, someone's deep intention. Like, where are you going with your life? What really matters to you right here and right now? And being able to use what we know from the Enneagram in a way that's helpful to them. So we have to be adaptable, sensitive, and very respectful, so that we don't try and convince people or even teach them the system. There's another teacher called Klaus Roger who emphasizes also what Mario Sikora emphasizes, is when you go into a corporate environment, your client doesn't want to study the Enneagram any more than they want to study Kabbalah or astrology or feng shui or whatever it is that's your special interest. They literally don't care. So going into a corporate environment, I very often won't show the Enneagram symbol once. And I try not to even mention it. I kind of de-Enneagram the Enneagram in a corporate space so that people can see the practical, relevant bits that matter to them and their decision-making and their strategic challenge. So I'll get to that a little bit later around, how I sometimes use it in a corporate environment. because then you're really respecting the people's context. You're not imposing your worldview on them. And I find that orientation much more relevant. And then there are always going to be people that really want to explore it more deeply and can see what it's about. But I don't think that's our choice to make. I mean, obviously, coming from my orientation, I see that as a spiritual thing. It's almost like, is it that person's destiny to take this path? I wouldn't say that to them, of course, but it's just respecting that everybody's on their own journey. So coming back to Mario Sikora, if I show you his work about instincts. So one of the things that's the core driver of our behavior in the world, the core driver of how we get fixated and how we get stuck and how we overfocus on one thing, is 3 instinctual drives that we have. And these are biological drives, they're not negotiable, and they are about our pure survival. So in the main Enneagram, the one instinct is called self-preservation, which is about our physical survival at a very literal level. Mario Sikora calls it preserving. So when we talk about self-preservation in the mainstream, I'm going to call it mainstream Enneagram, not his work, it's really about our individual orientation towards our well-being. When you use it in a corporate environment, he's got language about how that plays out in a corporate role, in a system. And those would be things like the infrastructure, the planning, the systems, the processes, the IT, being organized, your budgets. So those are all the things that would fall into preserving. And those things are highly relevant for people in a corporate environment. It's like, oh, they're those people that really like taking care of that stuff. They like the risk and compliance stuff. They like the deadlines and the plans. The other people who really hate that stuff. So some people are much higher in preserving and some are lower. So here you've got more of the personal language around it. There's a whole matching language that's more organizationally oriented. So that is where it would be really worthwhile going and exploring Sikora's work more deeply and, going on his corporate-oriented courses. Then again, in the work that's not so oriented towards corporate leadership and teams, the other instinct is called the sexual instinct. So that's about attracting somebody, bonding with people, establishing one-on-one connections, an energetic intensity. So that's a one-on-one type of bonding instinct, but it also expresses our creativity and our fire. So there's more to it than just sexuality. In an organizational context and in Mario's work, he talks about transmitting. So that would be things like marketing, the sizzle, the spark, the roadshow where you inspire people, and the charisma. So all of that stuff is the transmitting. So you can see how it's important, but it's very different to preserving, and you need both. So this would be the kind of thing that establishes a good image in an organization. People want to work with you, you inspire them. So there's some of that flavor to it. And then you've got the other instinct, which is the social instinct, and that's what it's conventionally called. Mario, and I didn't put it here, he calls it navigating, and I should have put that in the heading. Navigating is about trust and reciprocity. So that's more about building stable long-term partnerships, about really being conscious of the system, being able to operate effectively in that system, and knowing one's place within power dynamics, knowing who's who, and networking, and not in a schmoozy sense, but being known and establishing credibility and presence and playing a meaningful role in a community, and understanding, inclusion, working for the good of the system. So you can see exactly why each of these three is so critical. That often we're very unconscious about the fact that one of them is running the show. And in the Enneagram, one of them is blind or repressed. So there's one of them that we're usually pretty unconscious of, and not just don't pay attention to it, but we actually don't like it. We push it away. So while I was talking, you probably thought, ew, I'm not good at that, or I don't even like that stuff. So in my case, self-preservation, blind, that kind of stuff, it just feels exhausting and confusing. I find it very difficult to establish structure and routine. Preserving people are really good at that. So this is also another way in we get teams to really appreciate one another and to see, wow, you know, we need some of that in this team. We all, you know, guns blazing and excited and new ideas, but this stuff is falling over. And also maybe, you know, people are thinking that we want all the limelight and we're not really establishing good partnerships. So depending on which one is blind, it's going to affect how you work, how you're seen, your focus. And the objective in the Enneagram is to help us to really develop a healthy relationship with each of these instinctual areas, with each of these instincts within ourselves, so that we can be in touch with them, that we can be aware of them and use our instinctual intelligence in healthy ways. And when they are distorted and when we're over-fixated on one of them, it can lead to quite destructive behavior and quite selfish behavior and very artificial behavior in many senses. So that's an area of the Enneagram that's very powerful. And yeah, Alistair, you'd be very well advised here to go and check out Mario's work around the leadership aspects of this. Like, how do these biases play out in terms of leadership behaviors and vulnerabilities? Like what you risk by not paying attention. So you probably picked up quite a bit of that already from the examples that I gave. And then the Enneagram describes our patterns in a lot of detail. So it describes our intracyclic dynamics. What is going on within ourselves? What are our motivations? What are we trying to avoid? What are we scared of? And then how does that play out in our behavior, in our fixations, in our addictions, our compulsions, our self-deception? So it gives us an immense amount of sophistication and clarity around what's going on within ourselves. And when we start studying it, and when we discover the main ones that we are using, we realize, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that that's what I was doing. I have been avoiding weakness my whole life by being tough and armored and not letting people see my vulnerability. Or I've been so worried about being morally deficient or bad or corrupt in some way that I've been overcompensating and avoiding that by being incredibly perfectionistic, having this very harsh inner critic and being very judgmental of myself and others, and obsessive compulsive, whatever it is. It can go very far from being a kind of mild fixation to being really controlling of one's behavior and one's outlook. So you can see some of the ways in which the avoidances play out. These ones are quite recognizable at a behavioral level. So we all know that person who's so easygoing, they go with the stream, they're cool, what you feel like doing, I don't mind, whatever you want. They can't make up their mind what to eat at the restaurant. So when we start getting to know this, we often get to know at the level of the superficial behaviors. But when we get deeper and deeper, we start understanding why that's going on. So what is the person trying to avoid? What are they scared of? So the line in that example I just gave, they're trying to avoid disconnection. Here it says conflict, but what that really means is they want to stay connected to others and they don't want to risk that connection. So all of their behavior that manifests from that core wound, core fear, plays out in various aspects of their life. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but just to give you a sense of what the Enneagram has. And this isn't all of it. It gives us detailed understanding of the different layers of our personality. So the image that we project, that we want people to think we're fun or successful or attractive or powerful or sweet, whatever it happens to be, the outer layer, and then where that plays out. Is it in the domain of getting resources and making money? Is it in the domain of my interpersonal relationships? Is it in the domain of the broader context? So these things will play out quite specifically. Then it starts getting closer and closer to what's actually driving this and the defense mechanisms that prevent us from seeing the truth of the suffering and our wounding and our childhood experiences that have given rise to this whole mask, this whole strategy. So as we study it, we start getting deeper and deeper. And as we ease through these strategies and develop compassion for the person behind the strategies and the need for deploying them, they start to softly ease. So it's not about attacking the strategy. It's not about trying to dismantle it or being brutal with it. It's really about seeing where it comes from deep within and gradually realizing, okay, I can be with myself. I can be with my feelings of inadequacy enough that I don't have to stop acting. You know, I don't have to put on a fake show here. But it's a lifelong journey, and these things are triggered in us time and again. And yeah, the multidimensionality of the system, again, I'm just giving you a sense of where it goes, because there's more and there's more and there's more. And just as you think you've got it, now you can be looking at the type behaviors and the stereotype, oh, type 2 is the helper. Then you start getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And there's just more and more to discover. So people that have been working with the system for 30 years can still study it. And it's also the kind of system where you can integrate all of your other areas of interest and expertise, whether it's psychodynamic psychology or NLP or energetic work or spirituality, whatever it is. The Enneagram provides quite a nice framework for the integration of whatever your special interest is. Now, some people are very interested in the somatics of the Enneagram. I'm very interested in trauma, traumatology, and how each of these type defenses is a response to trauma, and how the Enneagram can support the healing of trauma when it's used in a kind and sensitive way, rather than as a typology, rather than as a labeling and shaming system. So really, you know, this whole picture is just to really show you that this is not a superficial thing at all, and not reductive. And then just some of the contexts in which it can be applied. So I've spoken a bit around the instincts, Mario Sikора's work, organizational and leadership development. It's very powerful in these contexts. The way that I use it is in combination with strategy development processes, where I work with leaders around their strategy and their objectives. So where are you going? What are your preoccupations? What problems are you trying to solve? What's happening in your industry context? Really getting an understanding of their focus areas and what they're trying to accomplish. Don't mention the Enneagram one bit. Where would you like to be a year from now? What is this organization about? And helping them to clarify their value proposition and, you know, their definition of success, etc., etc. You know, it's very, very business oriented and zero esoteric. And once we've worked together to clarify that, to help them to say, okay, as part of the execution of the strategy, we need the leadership effectiveness and the leadership culture that's going to bring this whole thing to life. It's very easy to state these things overtly, but to actually make it real with our everyday behavior and our communication and bringing people along. That's where it actually comes down to our leadership presence, our ability to engage people, to create the right level of accountability and autonomy. So the Enneagram is a brilliant, brilliant tool for the leadership development and team effectiveness work. And you can squarely position it this way. If this is your sphere of influence, if this is where you work, if this is the kind of thing that you do, you can use the Enneagram to say, okay, strategy execution, what leadership things do we need to do? It's not in the least bit fluffy, very, very practical and real. And these are some of the things that I emphasized with a recent client, things that came out in one of their culture surveys as being issues. The Enneagram can help them to become self-aware of their micro behaviors in the moment that are driven by their fake image, by their desire for prestige, promotion, whatever, that they might lose sight of some of the things that really matter to their people. They might be wanting to be sweet and kind and avoiding those courageous conversations and giving people, robust and truthful performance feedback. So the Enneagram can help you understand how to give feedback and what's stopping you within yourself. And it can also help you to really understand how to give feedback to a different kind of person. So what you think is normal and what you can take, someone else will react to in a very different way. So you might be very assertive and you might be, tell it like it is, come. And the other person is, very conscious of power differential. They might feel very insecure about their job. They might have more of a need for approval and acknowledgement than you do. So it's about really getting a sense of who is that person and what do they need from me as a leader in order to bring out the best in them and for them to be engaged and motivated and actually like their job. So the Enneagram there really helps. And obviously what goes along with it is an appreciation of difference, diversity, divergence. And here, I love to work with historical and socio-demographic difference and, bringing about more historical honesty about the way the world is, prejudice and things like that. The Enneagram then adds another layer to that of, okay, so we come from different backgrounds and we've had different historical experiences and we make attributions on the basis of that, whether about race, gender, class, sexuality, whatever it is. But the Enneagram helps us to understand diversity of thinking, of relating, of acting. And so when I work with it in a corporate environment, I'll work with it in this kind of way. So I still, may number the types, but you'll see there's no Enneagram symbol here. Well, I put it there just because that's my symbol that I use for my company. But I would describe the types to people in terms of these patterns. Now I would have done a debrief with each person and help them uncover their preferred strategy. But when working with the team, to really emphasize, okay, what is this thing? This is a system that helps us understand our thinking patterns, and those are the three blue. So there are three differentiated main ways in our thinking styles, in our way of thinking about the world and what matters and our orientation to it, and about anticipating things and making sense of things. So that's the thinking center. And within that, we've got one of them. That's our dominant way of doing things. So people will read this and they'll say, yeah, that's me. And they'll laugh, they'll recognize themselves so quickly. And then we've got a way of acting in the world, our autonomy, our agency, our way of getting things done. And there again, there are these three action styles. People are able to very quickly self-identify here, I find. And then the feeling and relating is, how do I connect with other people? How do I relate to my own heart, my own feelings? Do I make time for feelings in my life, or do I put them aside? Am I very oriented towards other people's feelings, or am I a very deeply introspective kind of person? So, and each of us have all three. We all have a head center, we all have a brain, we all think, we all have an awareness, an intellect, and a cognitive style. We've all got a heart, and we all have to relate to people, and we all have to get things done in the world and have agency and efficacy and, be here and do things and take responsibility in the world. So the way I work with it is I don't say you are a 3, you are a 9. I'll say, okay, which of these styles do you relate to? And in a corporate environment, this really helps because then people don't feel boxed or labeled. There's a dynamism to it. They appreciate that they've got a bit of each and they have the fluidity. It also creates a lot of safety because then people don't feel like this knowledge might be abused. So often they will identify with that and they'll say, yeah, I'm a 5. They really relate. But it's then up to them how they work with that. But it does mitigate the risk of them labeling each other. So then you can use that information in different ways. You can use it qualitatively and get people to talk about it, share in dyads, etc. You can also show how the team is constituted, where there's a lot of stuff and where there's stuff missing. Oh dear, we've got none of this. Nobody's going to care about that stuff. We've got a lot of this. That has certain implications. So it helps us to see where are our blind spots as a team. And it helps us to understand some of the polarities. Like where are we low? Where are we really high? What does that mean? Okay, this team, we're going to be really tough. We've got a lot of the 8. We're going to be domineering. We have a bias for action. What are we neglecting? Enneagram helps us to see that, to figure out what that's going to look like in our leadership behavior and where we need to be conscious of how that's going to be received. It also helps us to understand the problem-solving strategy. So some people, are very optimistic. Don't worry, it'll be fine. There are 3 types like that. The competence types, there are 3 types like that. Objective, rational, let's get it done. Solution-oriented, not about the feelings, about the detail, the correctness, objectivity, and getting from A to B. The emotional realness types, a totally different orientation. So there are all these triads in the Enneagram of the way in which different types group together that help us understand multiple aspects of them and help us to understand why some people just get each other and some people just don't get each other. So if you have a team and you say, oh, okay, I'm totally positive outlook, that's why that person actually gets irritated with me, because I'm not looking at things squarely in the face and I'm not noticing the risks. So it helps us to appreciate that and to bring our strengths together. It also helps us to understand differences between different organizational levels. So even for people who are brand new to the Enneagram, a leadership team that I'm working with at the moment, talking them through the difference between the senior management layer and the supervisory level. Where are the big blind spots? Where are you going to miss them? Where are you going to be focusing on stuff that they really don't care about? And what does that mean for your communication, your planning, your processes, your systems, how you intervene and how you manage change? So it gives you a lot of insights into ways in which you can work where you're not going to be imagining what people want to hear, but you're actually speaking to their core concerns. Let me stop there again for a second before I go on to this section. Anyone like to ask any questions or clarify anything? I hope that the part on the organizational stuff was helpful. Alistair, given your earlier point.
Yeah, super helpful. And my next step for next year is actually to do the teams training. I think that's very critical to understand how that all plays out in a team dynamic.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Wonderful that you have a sense of where you want to work. I think that's really important, is that we figure out what we love and how we can use the Enneagram in that space. And Jill, you wanted to say something?
I was just thinking actually that, that realm of organization, team development, etc. Because at first I was hearing about the personal development, a lot more about that and how you can go deeper to understand your true self and the issues that you had as a child and stuff like that. And then and so I was very pleased to hear you go into the team development and the organizational development in that realm, since that really interests me, and that's the sort of stuff that I'll be taking in my toolkit to help teams, work better. And there's so much alignment when you said, what we would do first would be the strategy. That's exactly how I would do it as well. We'd first, identify where do you want to be, not just in a year, but in 5 years, 10 years, and then bring it down to the in year. So in year is the closest thing, but where do you want to be in 5 years time? Get them to think big, and then sort of, get them to think in year. And I think it's great to have a tool that can help explore all of that as a team.
Yeah.
And how they could understand their true selves, be their true selves, and help deliver that, and then understand each other as team members as well. So I see it also as a very good coaching tool, if you're doing one-on-one coaching or even group coaching, to help get the shifts that that the team might be looking for in order. And I love it with regard to delivering on some tangible, meaty things. If it's just all fluffy, so we'll work better together, that does not pay the bills in this current environment. People want to see the return on investment. They want to be able to tie it to, a real good, tangible result, And, and I was on a call with colleagues this morning, and we were talking about that, the days of people saying, well, let's just do a team builder.
Yeah.
We don't want to do that anymore. We want them to see the return on investment in terms of how this will help them deliver on the results in a very uncertain environment, So, so I think this is what you just described really resonated with me in terms of how it could be used with teams to get them to navigate through this very, volatile, turbulent environment that we live in.
I love that emphasis that you're doing and making on the.
I see you taking notes, so that means I said something good.
Yeah. Just speaking to your point around the volatility and the complexity, and how can you use this to help people operate in that world with more agility, with more flexibility. And there's some of the leadership competencies, things that are identified by the WF, say around 4th IR competencies. This is the way you can kind of solve this work. Cognitive agility, creative problem solving, innovation. So working with the Enneagram allows you to unlock your stuck ways of thinking, to think about things from new angles. So there are lots of ways in which it supports exactly what you're saying. And I just love the way you're emphasizing relevance. It's absolutely spot on. And if you understand your clients in that way and you're close to their concerns, then you're a genuine partner. You're not some weirdo hippie that's going to, Jedi power them and change their beings. I'd like to be that. No, I'm joking. But that's really great to see, okay, this is what they want to need. This thing has got really good explanatory power. It's very practical. One of the things I like to do in corporate environments when I'm doing strategic work and change work is, okay, we've got all this self-insight, we've had these conversations, we've spoken about the strategy. So what? Make a note, book it in your diary. What are you going to do on Tuesday at 9 o'clock? It's going to take you 10 minutes to act on your insight right now. So people then start getting into a virtuous cycle of positive change. So I like to think about it in that way, in an agile, iterative way, a micro experiment. Yes. Something I didn't think I could do this morning. I realized, wait a minute, if I just overcome that little self-limiting belief once for 5 minutes and take the risk of picking up the phone to someone I was too intimidated to phone half an hour ago, I'm just going to see what happens, because it's a safe to fail micro experiment. If you look at agile and complexity theory,
Correct.
you start doing these tiny little experiments, and literally in the coaching session with someone, they'll say, oh, I know what to do. I've got to make this decision. I haven't spoken to him. I don't know what he's going to say. I say, well, have you messaged him? No. Why not? Okay. Well, because he's too powerful. There's too much perceived power distance. Like, okay, right now, here's his mobile number. Send him a WhatsApp saying, can I please talk to you about this? I need to make this decision. Okay, does it? Next thing the phone rings. Hi, thanks for your message. Great. By the end of the coaching session, in vivo live, the problem's been sorted out. So the person sits there like, oh, they didn't realize that that was possible. They were so inhibited by their sense of their smallness and the power imbalance that they didn't realize that person was waiting for somebody in their team to step up and say, there's this problem, these are the options. So once you understand that someone who looks intimidating might actually have a big appetite for being challenged, then everything starts to change very quickly. And when these small successes build on each other very quickly. So yeah, basically just really reiterating and supporting and validating your point and kind of validating you and your orientation towards your client's success, and learning the system will support you in that. It's just going to strengthen your ability to deliver and to have credibility and relevance. And also, we've got to adapt as consultants. What you were saying earlier, the days when people would go away and build go-karts and, paper mache, whatever we used to do in team building, people don't want to do that anymore. It's like people recognize that it's actually pretty draining and it's not really that fun actually. And we'd actually rather be getting on with the job and doing things that are going to make it.
Correct.
Yeah. So is there anything in what I've said that's raising more questions for you, or how are you feeling?
No, that all resonates, Ingrid. I mean, how, again, from the conversation we've had before, the multiple tools that we utilize to get a client to different stages. And I sort of am aligned in your thinking of, I want to learn as much as I can so that I can be the best version of myself for the clients, and being able to tap on different things, since there's a universe of knowledge out there. And I think getting into from a client perspective, the tangibles is so important. So being able to understand how you can use this, to really coach people to what we call eliminate their self-limiting beliefs.
Yeah.
So we, as you know, I'm a Lego Serious Play practitioner as well. And one of the things that we did as a director group was create a model of who we are and our ethos, we called it. Yeah. And the model we created really spoke to how do we get people outside of the box of their self-limiting beliefs and get them to perform and do things that they didn't think was possible at all, yet also be there to guide them so that, to your point, their failures aren't so huge that they can't, they also learn from failures. We strongly believe there's a lot you can learn from failures. And so how do we sort of create that environment for them? And so this is just like, if I show you our Lego model, you'll see that's the beginning part with the self-limiting beliefs that we believe that our interventions with clients are to get them to see beyond that. And I think the Enneagram will help with that when they understand their true selves and understand, you know, all the negative things that they do to themselves, and be able to remove those so that they can, you know, flourish and be the best version of themselves.
Yes, that's beautiful. And the way that I split that kind of work in organizations is that in the one-on-one work, I'll help people to go very deep to understand where those self-limiting beliefs come from, and to have deep self-compassion for themselves, for their childhood self that developed those false self-beliefs and those limitations. And at the personal level, it's a gradual development and expansion of their identity, and a depth of confidence, and an ability to kind of stand in their power and, you know, establish healthier boundaries, have more honest conversations, be more skillful in their interpersonal interactions. At the team level, we don't, or I don't expose people psychologically. So there it will be more about the
Yes, exactly.
Okay, what does competence look like in the situation? What does positive outlook look like? What does honesty look like? So working more at an interpersonal level where it's more about respect, collaboration, and, you know, honest conversations. So
yeah,
so I always see those two levels, or those two aspects, and I keep them quite separate, because I don't think people show up at work to be psychologically exposed.
correct. And the only thing that the only thing I would get nervous about is, and I guess because we delve into human behavior, sometimes and one of my colleagues is an organizational psychologist, sometimes there's a line between what we can do with the knowledge we have and when we need to pass a baton over to a professional so that they can deal with the things that we are just not equipped or trained professionals to deal with.
Yeah.
And I think it's very important with a tool like the Enneagram to understand and know where that line is, for fear of doing more damage. Because, I mean, anybody who's been to a therapist knows that some of them work for you and some of them don't. And the ones that don't can do more damage than good. So I always think whenever you're coaching, whatever tool you're using, it's so important to understand where the line is. So in terms of your capability, or whether you need to hand it over to a PhD person to deal with that particular issue, so that you do the best you can for the client and not do more harm or damage.
Yes, such an important point, such a profoundly important point, because you are equipped here with a very powerful system that can be shaming, it can hurt people, and to hold that power with great sensitivity and care, first do no harm, and with an absolute commitment to not traumatizing or re-traumatizing people, and appreciate the fact that they're going to be sitting there already with self-doubt and shame and insecurities, and for you not to expose them. You know, I sometimes say, nobody signed up for open heart surgery in public, you know, at work. So be respectful, and when you come across things that you know are beyond your scope of practice, to refer people, you know, to be really present and compassionate, and to know your ethical your limitations of your scope of practice, and to handle that really well. So thanks for that. It's really important. Thank you. Alistair, your hand's up. You're on mute, my friend.
Sorry about that. Yeah, thanks for that. Something just came up for me now. My first experience with the Enneagram, the teacher was saying, don't use it for recruitment purposes. And I had this huge debate with him. I'm like, if you're looking for a certain type of person, surely you must get a certain personality type to fit that role. So I'm just curious to hear what your thoughts are about like upfront recruiting. Let's say a team is short of a certain personality type. is it recommendable to get someone who fits that kind of role?
So in South Africa, it's illegal to use it for recruitment because it's not a registered, normed, and validated psychometric instrument. And so it's not allowed to be used in hiring decisions. And I think that's right, actually. And also, you know, we're not hiring people on the basis of personality. We're hiring them on the basis of capabilities, skills, expertise, competences. So, no, we all know whether or not we want someone who's good at certain things. Like I sometimes do say, I need an Enneagram 1 to compensate for the fact that I'm so scattered. I want someone who's super organized, meticulous, pays attention to detail, likes structure and processes, and can organize things for me. I need someone like that. That could be a number of people that are good at that stuff. I just sometimes use the shorthand Enneagram 1, you know, because Enneagram 1 personality style often is like that, very conscientious. So, but when we're writing a job description, we can say, what I need is someone who pays attention to detail, conscientious, you know, good at planning, good at budgets. So then when the person reads the job description, they self-select against that. And it doesn't really matter what type they are. They might have a higher likelihood that you're going to get an Enneagram 1, but you're not filtering people on the basis of their personality style and their core motivations in life. I think that would be really unfair. So yeah, I wouldn't use it at all for recruitment. It's not good. Yeah, so thank you. Okay, any other questions before I go on? I've got a bit more stuff I want to talk about around the personal transformation side. Any other questions? No? Okay.
Ingrid, it's Dinesh. Hello.
How are you?
Hey, sorry all. Hello, everybody. I came on late and I got a bit confused about the time. Quick question, Ingrid. You know, I was interested to see the slide that you had up there about strategy process with an organization, to go through it in a very sober, in a way, technical way, and then to bring in the sort of Enneagram understanding of individuals in the team. So I found it interesting that you placed it at the back end of the process. You know, because I was wondering about that. Where could that be? And I suppose what I wanted to throw into as a question is that, you know, part of the strategy conversation is the need for people to listen to each other. You know, the sort of really all of the truths in the system or in the community, in the team, and so on, and how difficult it is actually to listen to each other in a way that we can suspend our own attachment to our truths, you know, and that as a starting point for a strategy sort of process.
Yeah.
How helpful it could be to actually come into a strategy process, having an understanding of where and how people are coming into it, you know, their perspectives on the world. Yeah. Anyway, I was just wondering about that. Was quite interesting. Yeah. Perhaps.
Really good point. So in that particular example, yes, the leadership stuff comes at the end. Okay, we've got all this overt strategy about this is where we want to go. These are the metrics. How are we going to get it done? Some leadership. But there is a big case to be made for the other way around. And I do sometimes do that. I'll do the upfront piece around the team effectiveness, the communication in preparation for a strategy session, so that we go into the strategy session with an awareness of how do I listen? How am I taking up space? How am I posturing? How am I engaging with certain people? Who triggers me and why? That person that raises the concerns and says why things can't be done. Why do I get so flooded with rage when I'm coming up with big ideas and they're like, that's not going to work. We tried that 3 years ago. So understanding the differences and then being able to manage those triggers differently in the strategic planning process. It's very, very powerful, and it does really improve the quality of the conversation. So usually if I speak to a client, I'll say, this is, we can do this or we can do that, and talk about the pros and cons, depends on the time frame, where they are, the priorities. So both can work, or you can do it real time within the strategy facilitation to say, okay, everybody, let's stop, let's really hear what are the implications of that question. So you can kind of build in some of the awareness into a more structured process, but there's different ways of doing it that would be tailored to the environment. But thanks for that question. Very, very helpful.
Thanks, Ingrid. Yeah.
Pleasure. So let me see where we are. I'll take you through the last section. I think it's the last section, if I remember correctly, which is more the psychological and spiritual development side here. So this is kind of where my heart is, although I have a strategy consulting background and I love the corporate work and I love seeing organizations succeed and thrive and people grow. I think my deeper calling, in a sense, is working with these dimensions of the Enneagram that are really about what is your true, deep, deep, deep purpose on this earth, and a sense of connection to self, connection to others, connection to life, the earth, your sense of the mystery of the universe. And in my trauma work as well, using the Enneagram, it's really about this. It's about who are you really, without your constrictions, without your trauma, without your fears. What are you really? So this is the part that I love. And I also love different spiritualities, Christianity, Jewish mysticism, Islam, Hinduism, all of them have got beautiful, beautiful wisdom around the mystery and the beauty of what we really are, and how to appreciate life with a deep sense of gratitude and joy and a savoring of our human experience, which is so brief and so ephemeral. So this is one of the quotes from the teacher of the trauma counseling system that I am studying, which is called NAM, the Neuroaffective Relational Model. So for me, really integrating trauma healing, spirituality, and psychology. If you look at this, I'll just give you a minute to read it. So you can see with this, if we reconnect with our core vitality and our sense of deep meaning and purpose and getting to flow, this could be something that enlivens our relationships at home, at work, with our children, primarily with ourselves to start off with, that we reconnect with some very deep energy within ourselves. And then we start being able to live from a different state and a different place within ourselves. So we aren't trudging to work every day and trying to get over the week. It's like, oh, thank God it's Friday. Oh no, it's Monday. No, so we just go from week to week, from paycheck to paycheck. And next thing we realize we're 50 years old and we hate our jobs and we hate our boss and we're not doing what we love and life is passing us by. So for me, this thing of really appreciating that life is short, and what does that mean? And for me, that's a profoundly spiritual question. Obviously, it's also a psychological question, because it's about what do we value, what do we choose, how do we spend this time on earth, what do we bring to the world, and to just live from that place of valuing, like knowing what we are and how important people are, and to live with love and kindness. So this is very much my orientation And from a trauma perspective also, you know, how do we be with people in a way that makes them feel safe enough to release some of that constriction, to be able to connect again, to be able to release some of their fear of being here as they truly are, and coming into a more connected, safe, alive state. My one teacher calls it joyful aliveness. So what's stopping you from being in a state of joyful aliveness? Where have you fallen asleep? Where have you disconnected from yourself? And the Enneagram work can take us there. So obviously this applies to leaders, it applies to anybody. But this is an invitation. No, I don't go to my coaches in a corporate environment working with the CIO and, you know, go straight here. But usually it gets here, you know, in a process that the person will be expressing areas of deadness in their life, meaninglessness, depression, frustration, and we can get to the deeper levels of what is it that's going to make you feel alive. Also helps us to work with our triggers in quite an awesome way. So here, this is a quote from Wendy Palmer, who's a wonderful teacher of not just the Enneagram, she's an Aikido master, so she brings in a lot of that beautiful martial arts philosophy and the energetics of our embodied presence. It's quite wonderful work. But she speaks about how we're able to be in the here and now and to respond accurately to what's happening right now, rather than our fears from the past, our conditioning, our anxieties and fantasies about the future, where we sometimes blow things out of proportion and we think our boss is a giant monster. Meantime, he's just a dude with some issues. And we're able to then meet the present moment and the other with a broader range of options. We don't need to cut off that relationship. We don't need to become aggressive. We don't need to hide. We don't need to be obsequious, compliant, give away our power, whatever it is. We don't need to do the same thing every single time. We start to realize, wait a minute, it's possible to have that uncomfortable conversation rather than to go away and be resentful. So it opens up space and freedom for us to say, okay, how do I want to respond intentionally to the situation? What would be the wise, considered, balanced, kind thing to do right now? And if we manage to do that earlier and earlier, before we've been triggered into that emotional hijack, all the better. It still happens, we get hijacked emotionally, but the work that we do is to notice when we hijacked, when we flooded with cortisol and adrenaline, our body might be shaking, our mouth might be dry, we might feel like we can't manage. In that moment to notice, wow, I'm completely flooded and I need to just take 5 seconds before I lose it. So there's no unrealism in the Enneagram about suddenly becoming this perfect person. It's really about learning to self-observe the ways in which our instinctual survival strategies can cause us to do things that we regret, and just becoming a little bit more conscious, step by step by step by step, in how we react, and to gradually that reactivity gets diminished. So that's, you can see, I mean, it's just such a relief when we find that something that happens that would have taken us over the edge a few years ago, we now, we react with some serenity, equanimity, take it in our stride. Somebody can be insulting, we don't really take it personally. We don't necessarily dismiss it completely. We might think, oh, I wonder what made them say that. But those huge waves that buffet us this way and that start to subside. And we start being able to just take things as they come with a lot more presence and ease. So that's I think is just an advantage all on its own, that state of being. Jessica Dibb, one of the most important teachers in the current time, speaks about this aspect of the Enneagram and how it helps us to be a force in this world by transforming how we be. Sometimes you hear coaches saying how you're going to show up, as if you're going to choose a new image. It's not about that. It's about what place in yourself are you acting from. So how do you show up means how do you embody your living presence in the moment with self-awareness. This is what Enneagram tries to help us to cultivate. So dissolving our addiction to things that are ephemeral, things that are just glitz, things that are fake and shallow. And how do we bring more heartfulness, soul and love into our way of living and being with others. So you can see how different these different perspectives are, but underneath it all, you can see that there's an ethics. There's a commitment to goodness and truth and beauty and kindness across all of these domains, to compassion, to inclusivity. So, you know, that's what makes it across all these threads, something that's got a kind of ethical integrity to it, that for me is like a nice touchstone, you know, of what am I trying to do in this world? What has purpose and depth and meaning? And for a lot of people in the helping professions, you know, that's why we're doing it. So it's really a little bit about the psycho-spiritual dimension. And there's, you know, as I said earlier, there's a customized map for each of us. So for each of our different personality styles and combinations, the Enneagram actually gives us a map and some keys and some hints and some ways and suggestions about what to notice, how to notice, where to go, what to look out for, the traps and the pitfalls and the illusions. So it really, really helps us to notice, oh dear, there's that swamp again that I ran into the last 8 times, and there's that pothole, and there's that wall that I bashed into. Okay, you know, on the map, it describes things very clearly so that we can start finding our way around the pitfalls that we fell into before and avoid the same mistakes we've made 1,000 times. So I hope that that's given you a sense of what this thing is really all about and expanded your awareness of the fact that it's really, really very unlike other psychometric instruments. And I want to give you an opportunity. Some of you have seen these before. These are the affirmations for each of the different styles. And often I'll ask people to choose the one for their main style if you know it. Otherwise, the invitation is to look at any block and see if there's something in there that resonates for you. And we have all of these 9 styles within us. We've got an action style, one of the reds. We've got a heart style, one of the green outlines. We've got a thinking style, one of the blues. And there's something in each of the types that we can learn. So have a look here and see if there's anything that stands out for you that you can take in as something that you need to become conscious of in yourself and affirm within yourself. And often in processes, I'll get people to speak these out, and for the room, the team, to be able to witness them, because often they reveal something about the deeper nature of that person, their true strengths. This is one of the reasons I like to use things like this as well. So if you're watching the video, you might want to pause. If you're watching the video of this recording, and choose one that really speaks to you. Take it away. And then just to end off, a little bit of background about me and what I do. My business is called Takdir, which is an Arabic word meaning destiny. It also has connotations of our innate potential, the same way as the destiny of an acorn is to become an oak tree. We each have one of those as well. So I like to feel that I'm amplifying somebody's awareness of their own deep takdir, like, oh, what is your destiny purpose that you might have lost touch with. You've got a faint sense of it, but you've fallen asleep. And these are the things that I do. Increasingly, I'm doing facilitation and coaching supervision. So working with other coaches and psychotherapists and facilitators, OD people who want to use the Enneagram. So helping them with their personal presence and their things like in therapy, management of transference with the Enneagram insights, understanding their clients' processes. So that kind of work, and how to use it with teams, and then also really teaching the Enneagram a lot. So courses on how to coach with the Enneagram, understanding the different types in depth. So I run the workshop once a month on a different type each time. That's the Into the Wounded Heart series that Leah mentioned earlier. A coaching course that I'm going to be accrediting soon, and I'm in the process of moving towards getting IEA accreditation for all of the stuff that I've developed. So that's really what I focus on. And then there is a course schedule. So if anyone's watching this video, you can just email me at this address if you want to find out about courses for next year. There's quite a lot of cool stuff that I have scheduled. And yeah, and keep tuned into this YouTube channel, because I post quite a lot of updates of my free teaching and various things that I record from my community of practice sessions. And yeah, it's a wonderful community and endless learning. So that brings us to the end. And I want to take a few minutes if anybody's got any additional questions that you want to clarify, or yeah, let me hear from what are you taking away from this session? Catherine, can we hear from you?
Okay. Sure. What am I taking away? Oh, just how I've got to understand yourself first quite well, and then just how amazing the Enneagram is in helping you understand other people. And just as a 9 also, it's wonderful to be able to see everyone else's point of view and to see how my point of view fits in. So yeah, just taking away insights about myself and the connectedness of everyone.
Beautiful.
And everything.
Thank you. That's lovely. Yeah, it is. It's an amazing system. I mean, you can see why people, once you've tasted this thing, you want more. You unlock the power and you realize, whoa, this thing is very powerful and very practical. Yeah, thanks, Catherine. Yeah,
and one more thing, one more thing is just to thank you for the, there's just so many words, but for your knowledge, and then the peace and the encouragement and the hope that it just brings for me. So I'm very grateful for your knowledge and for your generosity of sharing it.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate that feedback. Yeah. And Stephen, you haven't spoken yet, and I don't know if you're there or if you're in a place where you can speak, but I'd love to hear from what you've heard, what you're taking away.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Hi there. Ingrid, yeah, I think I was curious about today because I'm not, well, as you know, I'm not new to the Enneagram, but I just wasn't sure what today would be about. But as always, I just want to thank you for your generosity of sharing information, and also I listen with new depth. I always hear something new and fresh. So even just when you think, or me, just when I think I know it, I don't know it.
Yeah.
And you've got to keep hearing it afresh, because there's always new layers with the Enneagram. You never get there. It's always a state of becoming.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's it. And no matter how much I read and see, there's always a new way, and that person brings in this angle, and they discover this dynamic, and the awareness and the depth keeps evolving. So absolutely, it's wonderful to also remain curious and not to think, oh yeah, I know the Enneagram, because it's not really about knowing the Enneagram, it's about knowing humanity and knowing the self. You're never going to run out of track on that one. So
Just when you think you grasp it, there's nothing to grasp. I mean, just when you think you've grasped it, it's ungraspable, I suppose.
oh, I love that. There's this wonderful quote from the Diamond Sutra in Buddhism, which is, the mind of the past is ungraspable, the mind of the present is ungraspable, the mind of the future is ungraspable. Everything about who we are can't be nailed down. It's about how do we get closer and closer in living connection with that. I mean, in the Enneagram, the ground of being, the mystery of who we are, the mystery of the cosmos, and keep reconnecting with that bewilderment. Actually, it's a wonderful state to be reminded of. It's like, wow.
And I think also just pertaining to what the previous gentleman asked, who's left now, but about using it as a recruitment, as part of a recruitment initiative. Just given what we're saying now, you can't reduce many psychometric tests aim to reduce something to absolute truths, and none of them actually can do that. And to socially engineer any team or group according to that, I mean, a one is not always the same as another 1, or 1/6 is not the same as another 6. Given the tri-types, given numerous, as you know, given numerous nuances and configurations of it, and to reduce anything is potentially risky. One has to work with it organically and in the moment. It has to be alive in the moment. One cannot tie it down ever. That's what I'm discovering.
Beautiful, thank you. And I'm really glad I'm recording this, because what you're saying is so key and so important. And I hope that all practitioners get to that point, that we aren't trying to be reductive. We aren't trying to turn people into objects that we can fit into a static, linear model and constrict them with our job descriptions. You're sitting opposite a real person with a whole life history, and no two people are the same. So, we can't project all our prejudice onto somebody. So thanks for saying that. I like that you used the engineering metaphor, like social engineering. There's a profound antipathy in us some way to that. We all know that it's kind of icky, No, thank you. Thanks for that point.
Thanks.
And Gillian, anything you want to say in leaving this session?
I was introduced to a book a couple of years ago. It's called, I'm sure you all have heard of it, but if not, it's called The 4 Agreements by Don Juan Miguel. And this reminds me of that, because it talks about, understanding, yourself and how you relate to others and how others relate to you. And I remember after reading this very thin book, and being appalled that I only just read it and that it could have solved so much trauma in my life if I had it before. But also wishing that everybody around me would read it because it's not just my application of it. And of course, if I was capable of applying it 100%, then, you know, I'm good. But it was also really helpful if other people around me applied it, because then it would make my life so much easier. If we all applied the 4 agreements, you know, and so I was listening as you spoke about the Enneagram, and particularly I think the last one with the brain and the colorful brain on the other side. And I was reading it and saying, yeah, I need everybody around me to do this, because that would just make me becoming and being so much easier if, you know, if they all just, you know, applied some of these things, then I don't have to totally ignore all the negatives they do to me, because they'll be doing less of it, you know? So it just reminded me of the 4 agreements. And after I read that, I said, oh gosh, this has to be everybody's Christmas present.
Yeah. So Lillian, you can buy some vouchers to send all the people that irritate you on coaching with me.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, send everybody by Ingrid.
Yeah, exactly. It's so funny when people sometimes send their spouse to me for coaching, and the person doesn't even want coaching, obviously. Like, why would they want to be changed? They arrive and like, how do you feel about having been sent to me for repairs?
When you don't even think you need fixing.
And you don't. Like, who are we to tell anyone to get fixed? You shouldn't even be telling us.
Absolutely.
So yeah, thanks for that. And that's so true. We have to be so aware of that. When we've got something like this, we start giving people advice and pointing out their shadow side and becoming arrogant and, you know, thinking that we know them better than they know themselves. And it's actually just rude and annoying. So I know I fall into that. It's such a temptation, you know, to start labeling the person and saying, oh, that's such an Enneagram 4 thing. And you just realize, oh my God, what have I just done? So to really not abuse this knowledge, you know, to handle it with care. And the 4 agreements is wonderful, you know, for people who haven't read that book. There's some things in there that are so powerful, like not taking things personally. And I love that word impeccability.
Yes, being impeccable with your word. That's just brilliant.
It really is wonderful. And that's also happens with the Enneagram, is that you cultivate a love of truth, and you start finding it less and less possible to betray that deep inner knowledge of truth. So it does change your life a lot when you start acting from there instead of expediently. Big changes. Now, thanks for that. And Dinesh, anything you're taking away?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm really grateful for this, the opportunity to learn, Ingrid. It's always really so informative, and I think it's been said already. You know, it feels a bit like it already has, you know, a few layers to it. This, you know, the Enneagram, all of the knowledge in it, and it feels like it's also, there are so many more layers. I haven't seen all of these layers, and each time I have these or listen in on these conversations, it becomes clear that there's so much there, you know. And maybe I just wanted to end off by saying that, like, I'm just sitting here and I'm feeling such a need, no, not a need, but, you know, as things become clearer for me as an individual, it feels so important to really be compassionate, you know, just for myself and actually for everybody. And that, like, yeah, it somehow feels really, really important. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That's beautiful. If you forget every single thing you ever heard about the Enneagram and that sense stays with you of compassion for why people are the way they are, you know, surely that's what it's all about. If we want to avert the human disaster that we're creating. Yeah, deeper connection, inclusivity, less violence. So yeah, I'm one of the idealistic types, as you can hear. But yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. And also, thank you for being here. What are you taking away?
Oh yeah, hi everyone. So I haven't said anything either. It's because I'm just absorbing everything. So I first heard of the Enneagram from my boss, who happens to also be a coach, but she's in business. And then she referred me to a coach who I'm working with, who is the one that invited me here. So I'm actually the first time that I've even ever heard of Enneagram, even the word or what it is, was April 2021. So for me, it's a whole new world. I didn't have any preconceived ideas about what it was, or if it was hippie or new age. I just thought, wow, I'd like to get to know more about myself. And this is not me as being a coach or as a practitioner, but me as Homoto trying to get to find out the deeper me inside, and the stuff that I've been hiding from, which is most importantly the areas that I'm working in. So I think I'm astounded. My takeaway is that I'm astounded at the depth of the Enneagram, and I'm learning more and more. There are some YouTube videos that I've watched. Some I can relate to, but some I don't, which is okay. I don't have an attachment to that. I just try to put into practice what I'm learning and what I can identify with. And then if there are any blind spots, I speak to them through my coach and tell her, do you think this or whatever? And then she always brings it back to me and puts it into the perspective of where I am. So I'm really, really learning a lot, and I'm still like super fresh at this. So thank you, Ingrid. Yeah.
Pleasure, and thanks for being here. And if we've got a Facebook community of practice group where I share a lot of free information. I'm always posting amazing quotes there, and we make announcements there of free teaching. Once a month we have free events where everyone's welcome, and we have guest teachers. I do quite a lot of teaching there, so it's a really nice learning community. So if you want to look on Facebook, look up Enneagram Community of Practice, and I'll let you in. And
I will.
The YouTube channel, the courses, there's actually so much free stuff. So you don't have to do the spirituality for sale thing. Obviously, there are workshops and things. I've got to try and sell some of my other work, but
of course.
But you're on the road, hey?
Thank you.
That's too wonderful. That's great. Thanks for being here. Yeah, the Enneagram really does open new pathways. There's a beautiful book by one of the best teachers called Gateways to Presence. I highly, highly recommend it. It's an audio book by Russ Hudson called Gateways to Presence. And it's for beginners and it's for advanced students. And it's a book that you can listen to 10 times in a row, because it really is deep, beautiful wisdom and self-knowledge. And there are even some little practices in there and meditations and stuff. So whether you're new or been on this road for 10 years, it's a lovely book. He made it with Sounds True. If you don't know Sounds True, but it's only audio, but really worth getting. So yeah, just promoting some of the best people's work. And yeah, if you want to email me, you're welcome to, and I can also, support you with showing you where to look, depending on what your own personal orientation is. Cool. So thanks, people. It was wonderful to have you here, and I look forward to seeing you again in Ennealand. Cheers. Lots of love. Ciao, ciao.